Welcome to the Boxing Source Podcast, where we go over the latest news in boxing and react to all of the fights that happened in the past week. Now, let's go to our host, J.R. Bell. Yo, what's happening, everybody? What's good? What's going on? We should be here live, checking in. Hold on a second, y'all. We should be here live. So hopefully you're able to see what's going on, see what's going down as we are here for March 8th, 2026. This is the newest edition of the Boston Source Podcast. Shout out to everyone that's listening live. Shout out to those that will be listening to or watching the replay. Okay. We got a few things here that we're going to be covering here in this edition of the midweek report. Oh my God. The Boston Source Podcast. Hey, I'm gonna tell you something here right now, man. I'm getting what is it? It's going to be man, it's gonna be like 5 days away until the host turns 45. So, hey, I'm telling you, man, I gotta do some things to stay sharp, man. Shout out to brother Joseph Heron here, checking in live on the Boston Source Podcast here. As we got a number of topics here that we're going to be talking about on this edition of the Boston Source Podcast. Was there action here this past weekend? Yes, there was. There is something going on at this particular moment that's starting up, but we had a good number of news that was surrounding what is happening there. For the main event of tonight's card, that is over in Las Vegas, over in the studio or whatever, the garage, or as Eddie Hearn says, the garage. Okay, so you have this bout. That's the main event that involves Jai Opetaia and Brandon Glanton. And it is, of course, it has had the buzz in reference to Zuffa Boxing because it was going to involve a Zuffa Boxing championship. So they were going to introduce the Zuffa Boxing belt, and that, the winner would be the Zuffa Boxing champion for that particular weight class, which is the cruiserweight division. Now, of course, people know that Jai Opetaia had been standing as the IBF cruiserweight champion. So once this bout was announced, the thing was raised as far as like with Jai Opetaia being involved and Brandon Glanton being involved. Would the IBF have this sanctioned as a world title bout? Now, you had the whole thing as far as like the build up and all this type of stuff. You get in a fight week, and you have, of course, people saying that, hey, yeah, you got Jai Opetaia. He's like the IBF champion, is supposedly ring champion and all that type of stuff. But, people wanted to know if he was going to have the IBF championship on the line. Well, as of a few days ago, we pretty much like had a decision that was made on that. So, we're going to kind of share that here. Hopefully, I'm able to share this because, some things kind of, happen and some things be bugging sometimes. So we're going to see here, we got this thing where we're going to be sharing it. You do see this here. Okay. Now, this comes from the IBF website, as you see here, if you're watching live. So I'm going to be reading this here real quick. You got the International Boxing Federation. They said they have withdrawn the sanction of the optional defense of the IBF cruiserweight title between champion Jai Opetaia and the 15th ranked contender Brandon Glanton, scheduled for March 8, 2026. That's, tonight. The initial sanction followed discussions that began on February 11th when the president, Daryl Peoples, after learning about the contest on social media, come on, reminded Opetaia's representatives of IBF Rule Number 5 governing champions and unification bouts. After continued dialogue on March 3rd, Opetaia's team confirmed the fight would not be a unification and that any belt awarded by Zuffa would be characterized as a trophy or token of recognition. Okay. All right. The IBF has not had any discussion regarding this bout with any direct representative from Zuffa Boxing. Okay. However, the organization received assurances from Opetaia's representatives that this would be the case. The IBF approved the bout under these conditions, as the bout would no longer conflict with IBF Rule Number 5.E.2, which states in part, for the purposes of unification of titles, the preeminent champions of the WBA, the WBC, and the WBO may be designated as elite contenders and may be permitted to fight for the unified title. They, talked about what was going on in the press conference that happened, on March 6th. said that they made it clear that the Zuffa World Cruiserweight title would be still contested on March 8th. The IBF reserves the right to sanction title bouts alongside other sanctioning bodies that comply with the same mandated regulations followed by the organization. With the sanction withdrawn, the Opetaia versus Clayton bout is now an unsanctioned contest via IBF, and they say IBF Rule 5.H states that, in part, an unsanctioned contest is a fight which the IBF has not formally approved for sanction or where sanction has been formally withdrawn. If a champion participates in an unsanctioned contest within his prescribed weight limit, the title will be declared vacant whether the champion wins or loses the bout. All right, I'm going to cut it right there. I'm going to cut it right there. Okay. Um, this kind of like says, hey, look, the IBF, my saying goes, the IBF be IBFing, when it comes to, the weight limits, the restrictions, all that type of stuff, as far as like rulings with mandatories, that type of thing. But here in this particular case, what the IBF is stating is that, hey, we didn't get any type of communication from like a certain time period, whether it was from February 11th to like March 3rd or March, 6th or whatever, that says that, hey, you're going to be participating in this bout, and that you would like to have the IBF be involved, or have some in some way or capacity the IBF be represented in a sense for this particular bout. Okay. Being a world champion, you do have sanctioning fees that are tied to it if you want to defend that title in any capacity. Or if you're not going to be defending that title in any capacity, as we've had in previous instances with other sanctioning bodies, the title that you hold, that particular sanctioning body will say, hey, okay, you don't necessarily have to pay the full fees to defend the title, but you'll have to pay a slight percentage of those fees while being represented as our world champion. Okay. So with this communication or lack of communication there from the team of Jai Opetaia and the International Boxing Federation, the IBF, they made the decision and said, hey, well, okay, if you're not, willing to communicate or, give any indication here, we're just going to say, hey, you know what? We'll just take your rights away as the IBF champion there in the cruiserweight division. So tonight, pretty much in a couple of hours, when Brandon Glanton and Jai Opetaia fight on Zuffa Boxing, it will not be for the IBF Cruiserweight Championship. It will just be for the Zuffa Boxing Championship. I mean, it is what it is. That on the Boxing Source, channel, on the podcast or whatever it is, we've had conversations with the presidents of the World Boxing Organization there in Gustavo Olivieri, and the World Boxing Council in Mauricio Suleiman, and particularly with Mauricio Suleiman. I brought up the whole thing with Zuffa Boxing, and that, he says, hey, if Zuffa Boxing wants to do their thing, that's cool. If people want to participate, in those Zuffa Boxing events, that's cool. As long as, you still, adhere within the rules of the World Boxing Council, and, we'll still have you, ranked within the WBC. Or if you're a world champion and you participate in one of those events, hey, as long as, you adhere to the rules of the WBC, we'll still recognize you within the rankings or as a world champion. So at least for me, this is the same case right here. It's just that, looks like Jai Opetaia and his team didn't necessarily, adhere to the rules of the International Boxing Federation. Now, I know that there's like a number of people that say, oh, see, this is why, a lot of these fighters ain't liking what's going on, with these sanctioning bodies and this and the third. But, at the same token, right, these organizations have been established for, a very long time, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, et cetera, et cetera. And for some, and in some cases, having, fighters go up to compete for these world championships, that gives them an added status. That gives them an elevated status as far as like popularity and things are concerned, because you have a ranking system that's established. You have contenders that are out there. If they, have these fighters fight it out in order to be a world champion, whether it's a vacant title, number one, number two, etc., then that says, okay, this particular fighter was able to beat, the top guy or the second best guy or the third best guy, and they're recognized as a world champion. So that says, okay, he's a world champion, so he must be, the best or among the best. So that kind of like gives a fighter an added status, gives them added attention, gives them added popularity. And as a result, when they do fight as a world champion, that gives them added interest to say, hey, okay, let's pay attention to this guy because he's a world champion. And so that's what, a number of these sanctioning bodies kind of like bring up is that, hey, if we, have you as a world champion, we're giving you this particular status and elevating your, popularity. So with that, you're getting more money, for your fights, and as a result, we gotta at least get a little bit of something out of that. Hey, like Denzel Washington said, hey, I'm leaving here with something. So that's kind of like how it is with a number of these sanctioning bodies that have been established, and here with this IBF conflict with Ja Opetaia in this particular case. Well, they're saying, hey, if you don't want to hear about the rules, that's cool. And the thing is, like, a number of sanctioning bodies have rules, and then there's some things where they kind of, maybe have a little explanation of why they don't follow rules, or sometimes there's exceptions. With the IBF, you really don't see that. Of course, with the example, mandatory challengers, like once they order a mandatory challenger, the champion has to face the challenge that mandatory challenger, or else they end up getting stripped. And even when they have something where a potential unification could happen, IBF be like, all right, you better make sure that it gets done, because if it don't, then hey, you're gonna have to face this mandatory, or we're gonna end up stripping you. So we're here, like I said, the IBF pretty much like sticks to their rules, pretty much by almost like by the letter. And here with the Ja Opetaia thing, it's like they made it be known that because of the lack of communication, like I said, like they didn't have any discussion regarding the bout with Zuffa Boxing. They had something through uh through excuse me, through Opetaia's team, right? That okay, that a Zuffa Boxing will reach out to you, okay. And the IBF, you see right there, they tried to approve the bout, under the conditions, and stuff like that. But with them not saying, hey, we don't want the IBF involved in this, or we don't want, the IBF belt to show up. When you show up and you have a face off with Brandon Glanton, you can have the ring belt with you, but you can't have the IBF belt with you, or something like that. Then hey, it's like, all right. So if y'all want to play that game, all right. The IBF said, all right, bet, give us back that belt. He basically said, give us back that belt. You know what I'm saying? So that's why you have this whole situation that's going on as we speak when it comes to this story with Ja Opetaia, the International Boxing Federation, and Zuffa Boxing. Now you have like other reporters that say what they say, but come on, y'all know how things go with these sanctioning bodies. Y'all have the whole thing there. Like I said, y'all see the website, at least, for those watching here, y'all see the website. All y'all got to do is go on that IBF website, and you see that little tab there that says rules. Bet you could click on that. You could look at the rules there for the International Boxing Federation and cite everything that they show right here with the rule number 5.E.2, all that type of stuff. You 5H, all of that, it'll be right there for you. So that's the thing that you got going on with this whole situation with Ja Opetaia and Brandon Glanton. I mean, hey, it ended up being a very good fight. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, you got the whole thing with the IBF stripping Ja Opetaia. Now I wonder if that could you know what? I might see if the IBF has something in store here later on this this year, if they they end up stripping Ja Opetaia, right? So with that, I'm gonna get back to the whole thing with the ratings. So I'm gonna get to the ratings here real quick. I'm gonna click on that, and I know they ain't really updated the whole thing on the actual page, right? But I'm gonna see here. I'm gonna try to share that here real quick, and then give a shout out to Brother Pugilism that put in something in the chat with one of the topics that we got coming up here. So I'm gonna go back to the ratings that they got for the IBF and the cruiserweight division. If this whole thing don't get out of the way, all right, bet. All right, so you see there, right? You got John Opetaia as they show there. Of course, they didn't update the page as of yet, but they had him as a champion. Okay, they don't have a. They didn't even have like a mandatory yet. Like the title was won in May of 2024, and he ain't even had the mandatory thing done yet, as at least as of now. They got number one and number two not rated. You got Chris Billum Smith, aka John Cena, there at number three, and Matthias Masternak at number four. David Naika, who did face Jai Overtire in the past, is there at number five. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of like what they have here in this situation. They might have it where Chris Billum Smith and Matthias Masternak will be fighting for the vacant title, unless if either one of those fighters have something scheduled at this point. Shout out to Pugilism. He says that he got Jai Overtire and Brandon Glanton going the distance tonight. But he also said, like, got a hunch that Keyshawn might be able to intercept the Rolly fight over Haney. Haney treated Rolly as a second option and is more expensive to PBC than putting Rolly in versus Keyshawn. Whoa. Whoa. That's a good that's a good one. That is a good one. That's a great one. Actually, that's a great one to say there, real, on that topic. Now, I'm gonna get into that here in a bit, but man, I like that. I like that. Shout out to pugilism. I like that. Like I said here with the IBF situation, with them recently stripping Jai Opetaia of that IBF Cruiserweight Championship. You'll have this potential situation with Chris Billum Smith and Matthias Masternak. I'm gonna see if I could get where Billum Smith could potentially be, if he has something scheduled or if anything's going on. Then maybe they could just go ahead and order that. His last bout was against Brandon Glanton. Like, he beat Brandon Glanton when I'm talking about Chris Billum Smith. He beat him there last April, okay, by unanimous decision, right? And he hasn't had a fight since, okay? You got, Matthias Masternak there, like I said. Damn, he had 38 years old, but he has the fight that's coming up on April 4th against Vidal Riley. He is on that Greenwich card there, of course, as headlined by Tarek Chisora and Deontay Wilder. So you're going to have Matthias Masternak there going up against Vidal Riley. That's going to be interesting because if you have Masternak winning, then yeah, he'll still have that status of there in the IBF rankings. But if he loses to Vidal Riley, then what would the IBF do in that case? Now, Vidal Riley there you could see is at number 7 in the IBF rankings. So we'll see what happens there with that, because you could say, hey, all right, we stripped Jai Opetaia, right? And then we got this thing scheduled here with Masternak and Riley. So they could say, hey, the winner of Masternak Riley could go up against Chris Billum Smith for the vacant title. So we'll see here. Shout out to Joseph here of course, Warwick Boxing. We has a thing there as far as like what's going down. He said he thought that the scorecards for that fight were a product of home cooking. I thought that he said should have at least deserved the draw. There was the best fight on the card outside the main event. Hey, yeah. So we got like I said, it's like a lot of activity that's going to be happening there within the cruiserweight division, because as I mentioned there, with Masternak versus Riley coming up, you're going to have Zurdo Ramirez. If you see there within the rankings, you see Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez as a WBA and WBO champion. That's going to be going up against David Benavidez on May 2nd in Las Vegas. So There's going to be a lot of movement going on here. With this news here about Jao Opetaia, you got the bout that's going to be happening on April 4th. There, with Masternak and Vidal Riley, and then you got Zurdo Ramirez versus um, David Benavidez. So I think Chris Billum Smith might actually it might have to see if Billum Smith could get a fight in the interim or something like that before we see what happens here with Masternak and Riley, and then like have that be ended up for the vacant IBF cruiserweight title later this year. We're gonna see how that all goes. You know what I'm saying? But like I was mentioning, there's a lot of activity there. That's gonna be happening. Yeah, because Glanton. He said Glanton should have deserved the draw. Yeah, that was a good scrap. It says shame that Glanton will prove to be a bit too shot warm for this version of Opetaia. Well, like I say, hey, Joseph has Opetaia there. With the win. I don't know if he got it by knockout, but like pugilism says it's going to be going the distance tonight. So we'll see here. We'll see here later on this evening here, as we probably got like the prelims for the Zuffa Boxing event going on right now. But we of course we try to do things to schedule here with the Boxing Source podcast. I mean, I'm not gonna necessarily do a live summary of the events here, at least not this time around. So maybe couple when they have a couple more events, then we'll do that as well. You know what I mean? So yeah, says Glanton versus Obataia is Zuffa's best case scenario. He says that Glanton is game, and if he survives and gives Obataia to a foul, then that sells a rematch and makes 2 stars for Zuffa Boxing. He says that Obataia needs the rounds. Yeah, yeah, I think the Obataia does need the rounds. You know what I'm saying? But now, given the situation that they have with Obataia, being with Zuffa Boxing, let's see who else they could get there. I mean, maybe because this is a cruiserweight division and Zuffa Boxing may likely say, hey, we could get a number of these cruiserweight fighters and sign them, and then just have them, compete for the Zuffa Boxing Championship there, whether it's going to be, Glanton winning or with Jao Opetaia winning. So that's going to be something there of interest there. Said yeah. Said can't put in Opetaia versus Benavidez. Yeah, if that fight even happens, I would have Benavidez. I would have Benavidez. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's that. Um, Let me see something here real quick. Let me see something here real quick. So yeah, that's pretty much what I had in reference to that particular bout. Um, I'm thinking that Obataia would be able to get the win, right? Um, but then after that, like I said, with this whole situation with the IBF and him not being the world champion for the IBF, what will that do for Jao Opetaia, in the future? I don't know, like, what his situation was as far as like beforehand, but it looked like, even with him being a world champion, even with him, kind of like being rated high in the cruiserweight division overall, that he didn't necessarily have the like say popularity of sorts to say, okay, yeah, we could set up fights here for Jao Opetaia, and that it would really be big events for him. So after we see what happens here tonight, I think it's going to be a good little scrap. But then, if he wins, let's see if he moves on there with the Zuffa Boxing title. If he doesn't, ooh, that's going to be a real, deterrent. But as pugilism was talking about here earlier, hey, we could have a rematch between those two. So we'll see. All right, let's see what will be next up. All right, so next up on the docket, we had this whole thing there. Shout out to what was going on yesterday, right? Because we had something going on through X, right? And X, Twitter, or whatever you want to call it. It is what it is on that front, right? But we had a conversation that was on Twitter Spaces, as they say. I'm gonna just go ahead and just say Twitter Spaces, right? That involved the current Ring Magazine champion at 140 pounds and the WBO champion at 140 pounds in Shakur Stevenson. He was there, through brother Hassan Wells there on X. And, we had a very extensive or extended conversation there on that thing. There is still, on X, you'll be able to, listen to that whole recording. And a number of people were able to jump on and ask questions, including myself. And one of the things that I brought up to Shakur Stevenson was that we've seen his performances that happened, of course, with the win over William Opetaia last year over in Queens, New York, and then of course his recent performance here against Teofimo Lopez. That what weight classes he feel like he would be most comfortable in. And he answered at the time that, he said, he ain't gonna lie, but he said he looked real comfortable there at 140 pounds. And that, he could really, do some work there at 140 pounds. Now, I know a number of people were like saying, hey, yeah, there's some, attractive fights at 135, which I'll get into a little bit later. But, given the other world champions there at 140, you got Gary Antoine Russell, that recently defended his WBA title, right? You got the thing there with Dalton Smith, of course, recently winning the WBC belt. And as of right now, you got Richard Hitchens with the IBF title. And you got a number of fighters that are former champions that are out there. Alberto Puello, who's scheduled to fight Dalton Smith. Well, not scheduled. I don't think they have a date for that as of yet, but the WBC basically ordered that. You got, of course, Pitbull Cruz there as the interim champion for the WBC. So, we got a number of great fighters there at 140. You got, of course, we're going on with Frank Martin, there at 140. You got Nahir Albright at 140 that, also, competing in the fight card that happened a couple of weeks ago. So there's a number of good potential fights that are out there at 140 pounds for Shakur Stevenson. You do have the other thing there with the rankings and all that type of stuff too. So I wanted to, see if I could, pull that up as well. As far as like, who's out there in the WBO rankings at the very least there too, before I get into, Brother Joseph's comment that, he just posted up. So wanted to, get into that because that's going to be the next topic on the thing. Cause I'm like, hey, yeah, I wanted to go into this. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, see, Rick Meridian is a fraud and should never be allowed to represent any hardworking fighters any longer. I'm gonna bring that comment up here again in a moment because hey, y'all, some of y'all know what I've basically been saying. I said it on Brunch Boxing yesterday, so I'm gonna kind of like bring it up again. And one way or another, if he ends up hearing it, oh well, but I wanted to get into this here. You see there Shakur Stevenson as the WBO champion. You got, of course, as I mentioned, Richard Hitchens, IBF champ, Dalton Smith, Gary Antoine Russell. You know what I mean? And you got Keyshawn Davis there at number 1. Of course, he is a former WBO lightweight champion. Okay, so he's there at number 1. You got Alfredo Alvarez. It's probably another name there. Lindolfo Delgado there at number 3. He might be involved with the IBF he is actually involved with the IBF because they ordered Delgado and Hitchens. The IBF did. Okay, so that's number 3. Alberto Puello at number 4, which I mentioned, has a thing there with Dalton Smith that could be made. You got Emiliano Vargas that was on the Matchroom Boxing card here recently. You got Arnold Barbosa Jr. He's supposed to be fighting against Kenneth Sims. That's gonna be a real good, interesting bout right there. You got Ernesto Mercado, Adam Azim, and so on and so forth, right? So we'll see how that goes. He said, what is it? Shakur really wants a Shane versus Floyd moment. He might have to entertain a 50-50 Exchange versus Ryan at Ryan's range, and at full 147, no, yeah, a bunch of what ifs. Yeah, of course, they had that whole little back and forth talking immediately after Shakur Stevenson, of course, had his win over Teofimo Lopez. But then when Ryan Garcia won the WBC welterweight title over Mario Barrios, they were talking about, oh, that could be a possible matchup. There, Ryan Garcia was talking about it, but Shakur Stevenson was saying, hey, maybe there'll be weight clause and all that type of stuff. So there's like a lot of stuff that was like in that Shakur kind of like explained with different topics. They're on that live or that space. Okay, the space was like over 2 hours. Okay, over 2 hours long, but number of questions were answered. Number of things were were said during that. But as I was mentioning, there with what I asked them, there I was only there, to ask like one question and one question alone. And that was, of course, with him, being the WBC champion at 135, and now the WBO and Ring Magazine champion at 140. Where would he, kind of like make his move? What one other thing that kind of like stood out with that conversation was when, yes, my quote unquote student, their brother Matthew of Brunch Boxing, brought up a couple of topics in reference to potential fights for Shakur Stevenson, including O'Shaquie Foster, and that Shakur kind of like brought up that, hey, O'Shaquie was at one point an interim champion there at 135. But that was, of course, because of the situation there with Stephen Fulton. So, going into that bout in December, it was supposed to be for the WBC super featherweight title. But with Stephen Fulton being as overweight as he was, they said, oh, well, you know what? Let's do this. Let's make it for the WBC interim lightweight title. Okay. So they made it for the WBC interim lightweight title, and O'Shaquie Foster wins and becomes like, interim lightweight title. But given the situation with Shakur Stevenson, and with him, ended up, being the WBO champion in 140 and the WBC stripping Shakur Stevenson in 135, it's like, well, if you're stripped at 135 and you're up there at 140, what's the point of me at the time saying at 135 if you're not going to be there? So that's why, at the time, O'Shaquie Foster said, hey, let me just keep this status here as a champion at 130, see if I get a unification at 130. But then Shakur, kind of like said what he said, he said Shakur versus O'Shaquie Foster would be like watching paint dry. Oh no, come on, man. Oh shoot, man. Oh, it's crazy work. Crazy work. But you see there the current situation there at 140 pounds with Shakur Stevenson. And the whole thing with the rankings there, you got, Keyshawn Davis there, I'm going to be mentioning that here a little bit later. But you do have like other potential matchups that are out there for Shakur Stevenson at 140 pounds. As far as like 135, we mentioned a few guys out there. You got Ray Murataya there as the IBF champion. Yeah, we do have Abdullah Mason as the WBO champion, but he hasn't necessarily been mentioned as a potential opponent there for Shakur Stevenson. Okay, yes, you do have Tank Davis there as the champion in recess or whatever it is there for the WBA at 135, and there may be news in reference to that. So we'll see. All right. Pugilism here on the chat says, hey, we need all the Matias, Zepedas, and Dalton Smith type pit bull type fighters to keep pressing, secure, and entertain. Tank just need to come back and fight Shakur. Well, I mean, we gonna be, I kind of like mentioned this, what is it, last week, that you could potentially have Tank Davis in a rematch with Pitbull. Now, if that happens, first off, what weight class will it be at? And then second, if you're going to, make that move, then we'll see. You know what I mean? Because if you're going to have the whole thing with Lamar Roach and William Cepeda over there at 135, then hey, if you want to go ahead and have a rematch with Pitbull Cruz, hey, cool. You know what I mean? Brother Joseph says here what the latest activity by the IBF and the WBC. Daryl Peoples and Mauricio Suleiman are making Dana White look like a genius. Why would the IBF penalize their champion by stripping them? Yeah, like I said, the IBF being the IBF, you know, like I said, I don't understand it. You would at least want to have some type of resolution that could be made. Yeah, I was mentioning earlier with the letter that they stated that they tried to be as open as possible, tried to have communication with the parties of Opetaia and Zuffa Boxing, but they said, hey, we didn't necessarily get any feedback or no emails, or they basically got ghosted like you know, Eddie Hearn, got ghosted a couple of weeks ago, when it came to uh, what was happening with the Zuffa Boxing then, right? But hey, like I said, the IBF be IBF, and that's what they made. That's when they made the decision and say, hey, well, Jao Pataya, yeah, good luck to you, man. But you can't, I guess, you can't represent us as a world champion anymore. So that's basically what they made it as far as like their decision. All right. Now, want to get into. Oh man, you know what? Let's get back to it because I want to get to this thing here, man. I'm gonna bring up this quote once again from Brother Joseph. Okay, now this is in reference to the ongoing saga between Virgil Ortiz Jr. and Golden Boy Promotions. Of course, they had the recent ruling in reference to that particular lawsuit in the case. The judge pretty much was on the side of Golden Boy Promotions, and now they're going to be going into arbitration. Now, I brought up the whole thing in reference to that lawsuit that was put up. Put like I don't know if I put out the link, but I've kind of shown parts of that lawsuit in details with the 20 to 25 page thing that they had out there. Okay, and of course, like the biggest things that kind of stood out was that one, they had an agreement with Golden Boy, 2 fights per every 12 months, had a minimum purse for it. They ended up having a signing bonus for it, which I mentioned in the last time, up to a $500,000 signing bonus for Virgil Ortiz Jr. Okay, 300,000 was paid out pretty much his signing. 100,000 was paid out, a week before his bout against Surrey Boachuk, and then another 100,000 was paid out either on October 31st, 2024, or whenever they announced the next bout that Virgil Ortiz would have, which ended up being against Israel Madrimov. That was February 22nd of last year. So he had $500,000 off that, right? Then he had $1.5 million for the Boachuk fight. And for him winning that fight, he had $2 million for subsequent fights at minimum, right? So started off with, Israel Madrimov, $2 million. Erickson Lubin, pretty much $2 million, or whatever it is. Now, if he was a world champion or a full-fledged world champion, his minimum purse would have been $2.5 million. Okay. Now, the whole little conflict that they had was with the potential bout with Boots Ennis that's being presented to him. He would have been paid, as Golden Boy was offering him, $3 million plus a pay-per-view upside. Okay. Now, they were contending, or at least Virgil Ortiz and his manager, Rick Meridian, were contending that they should get $7 million for that fight against Jerome Boots Ennis. Now, as you see here with Brother Joseph saying that, hey, Rick Meridian is a fraud and should never be allowed to represent any hardworking fighters any longer. Virgil should distance himself from Rick and his father from a business perspective. Now, here was the thing that kind of made everything blow up. After the decision was made, which was what, Wednesday, and then of course you had Oscar De La Hoya on, of course, his Clapback Thursdays. You're never a hater if you only speak the facts. And he basically put it out there that, hey, is this the same Virgil Ortiz Jr. that said on camera that he was glad that he'd been working with Oscar De La Hoya and saying that, hey, he sends me messages and does this for me and does that for me and all of that type of stuff. And then all of a sudden, now because of this potential bout that would be, really big well, not necessarily really big in a sense, but it does generate some buzz out there in boxing. Now it's like, okay, hey, listen, hey, Virgil, hey, you could make you could get up to $7 million. So don't listen to Oscar, don't listen to Golden Boy, um, you know what I mean? Don't listen to them because 3 million that's not enough. Ask for 7 million. Come on, man. Come on. Y'all saw. Listen, I'm gonna be real with y'all. Y'all saw what was going on with the fight with Virgil Ortiz Jr. and Eric Salubin that was out there, right? Y'all know the venue that it was placed in. Y'all know about or the potential revenue for that particular fight. So you're paying Virgil Ortiz Jr. 2 million for that fight, and you're trying to make that money back with the ticket sales or with the overall interest in it being, broadcast live on the zone. So as a promoter, you want those returns back, or as a network, you will want those returns back. And if you don't see that it would make that much sense to do it, then nah, it can't work. But given the conversations, what I'm saying, that I've had, with folks, and you talk about this but potential fight, right? What this manager here, Rick Meridian, was contending is that, oh well, hey, look, hey, you see that fight that happened on January 31st, with Shakur Stevenson and Teofimo Lopez? Yo, they each got $10 million. Yeah, they got $10 million because it's Shakur Stevenson, a multi-division champion. It's Teofimo Lopez, a multi-division champion. Okay. You got Boots Ennis that has been a unified champion at 147, but that's basically it at this particular point. Yes, he's an interim champion at 154, WBA. Okay. Virgil Ortiz Jr. is a interim WBC champion at 154, but not a full-fledged world champion and has never been a full-fledged world champion. Okay. So you're trying to jump the gun on trying to get as much money as possible when both fighters haven't really built themselves up as of yet. Right now, Boots Ennis is a little bit ahead of Virgil Ortiz because he's had, of course, those bouts that were in Philadelphia, the bout that he had against Imana Stanionis in Atlantic City. So, he's kind of like built something up. But with Virgil Ortiz, you haven't really done that yet, so you can't really build yourself off that. You know what I mean? He says Bruce Ortiz is only one of the biggest fights in boxing within the diehard community. There we go. Outside of that tiny bubble, no one knows who either fighter is. Rick is delusional. Yeah. And that's the thing, man. When I posted up the whole thing with the lawsuit and the whole back and forth that was happening, I don't know if I got it on my oh yes I do. I got it on the history, right? So we're going to do this here real quick, as I'm going to go to the bottom part of the whole copy of the lawsuit here as what is this exhibit? It should be Exhibit C, right? And I said it was like 20 to 25 pages. Nah, it's not. It's like up to 32 pages, okay? So where is this thing here, right? I want to post this up here. Page 32 is at the very bottom, right? So I'm going to share this here once again for y'all that's watching live, all right? We got this thing here with the copy of the lawsuit, right? So you kind of like see there, right? As it says, your comments about the negotiations for a potential fight against Iran Ennis are wildly inaccurate. Quote, well, that's quoted. Golden Boy has offered Virgil Ortiz Jr. a guarantee of $3 million for that fight, which is $1 million more than the guarantee required by the agreement, along with potential pay-per-view upside. In response, Mr. Ortiz has demanded a $7 million guarantee, which is more than 3 times what is required under the agreement and twice as much as Mr. Ortiz has ever earned in his career. So the demand is completely unreasonable given that neither Mr. Ortiz nor Mr. Ennis has ever proven the ability to carry a pay-per-view event. Manifestly, Mr. Ortiz is acting in bad faith and making wholly unreasonable demands. So you kind of like see it right there. Like Bruce Ennis hasn't headlined a pay-per-view as of yet. Virgil Ortiz Jr. hasn't headlined a pay-per-view yet. They have, as of right now, guarantees of around $2 million to $3 million per fight. That's pretty much like worked out. But a potential fight, between the two, yeah, you want like a slight increase, but not an increase of like a $7 million. That's absolutely insane. Now, we talk about the thing there with Rick Morigian trying to bring up, Teofimo Lopez and Shakur Stevenson, and that particular event, surprisingly was pretty successful there for the zone and for Ring and all of that, right? But again, that's those two fighters that are established that have been, either rated as like the top fighters in the division, whether it's 140, 135, or whatever, or 130, or whatever. You don't necessarily have that there with these two guys, and they're not established yet, in a sense. Kind of like said it with Boots Ennis. You had like a couple of fights there in Philadelphia, had the fights over in Atlantic City, and that's that. But with Virgil Ortiz, as I mentioned, with his bout against Erickson Lubin, that was pretty much the thing there to kind of like see, okay, is he, popular enough to bring that attention to have people attend his fights, number one, and two, how much would they pay in order to show up at its fight? And at least for me, I'm like, nah, I ain't like it. I ain't think it was a good look. You know what I'm saying? And it's in Fort Worth, man. So that's not that far from, where Virgil Ortiz is based at. But yet they couldn't bring that crowd out there for him. So hey, it is what it is on that front. But yeah, $7 million. Come on, man. It says that Xander Zayas is a bigger target seller than both men there, currently. Hold on, let me bring that up again. Yeah. It says there, Zayas, yeah. Even with the fights that Zayas has had at the theater at Madison Square Garden, he was able to, win that WBO belt last year at the theater at Madison Square Garden. And then you've seen him had the unification over in Puerto Rico. So, hey, there you go. You know what I mean? So with these two fighters, it would be best to have it be built. They basically had a plan there for Boots Ennis. Have them stick with that particular plan. If you're gonna be in there, you be in a position to be an interim champion there for the WBA, then hey, you could have a fight in the interim and then go after that WBA title later this year against Xander Zayas. Okay. But yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, that's what I'm saying there. That Puerto Rico, in that stadium in Puerto Rico for Xander Zayas, yeah, that was impressive. And with no major TV outlets there, it was on Top Rank Classics there that was on like 2B or whatever it is. But still at the end of the day, you had a good attendance for that fight there with Xander Zayas and Abbas Barao. Okay, but now going into this thing here with Virgil Ortiz Jr. With it going into arbitration, that is going to be a bad look because I mentioned this before and I mentioned this again. If you really had an issue with what was going on from, let's say, for example, whatever Rick Morigian was explaining on social media today, whatever, okay? If you really had an issue with the terms of the agreement that you signed, right? See if you can have somebody buy it out. I've said it multiple times, and I'm going to say it again. If you really have an issue with that, have somebody buy it out. Don't do what they supposedly said y'all did and say, go out to Eddie Hearn and potentially say that, oh, well, we could offer you this about like this for a guarantee where you could get upwards of $12 million. No, have somebody buy out the contract. You already had this agreement go from 2024 and it was going to last at the very least until 2027. Okay. So that means you would have had at least three fights. You would have had one more fight for this particular year. And then when it started again in August of 2026, so this year, you would have had one fight and then another fight, and then that could have been it for your contract. So that's basically three fights, right? All you had to do was just say, hey, if we're getting about 2 to 2.5 million of our base purse for any type of fight that we have, then let's see if somebody could just buy it out 6 million, and then we just have like a fight or whatever it is under another promotional company, and then eventually build up to a fight with Boots Ennis, or a fight with a Sebastian Fundora, or a fight with Zayna Zayas, or a fight with anybody in 154. But if you really were that much in conflict with the promotional rights agreement, just have somebody buy it out. That's pretty much what I say. Uh, Hey, or say, hey, there's a cheat code, but it comes at a cost with getting out of your comfort zone. Kick streams are available to self-promote boxes with other streaming pop stars. Pop the Man Will Force Networks. Good look with that one, because we had, of course, Keyshawn Davis that's been doing this thing on Kick, right? He's been doing it for like what, the past few days, or pretty much like the past week. You know what I'm saying? So how is it that you can't set up something where you could, build a audience, or build, a following, on these kick streams or whatever it is, and then say, hey, next time I fight, I know that I could have this many people here at least watching me, fight, whether it's on the zone, or going to the fight. But some fighters don't necessarily roll that way, or even with the whole thing with YouTube, a lot of these fighters have YouTube channels. Keyshawn Davis has a YouTube channel. Shakur Stevenson has a YouTube channel. A shout out to my guy there, the 2025 prospect of the year, Derek Scooter Davis, has a YouTube channel. Like a lot of these fighters now, coming up, or around that age group, they are utilizing social media, streaming, all of that stuff to their advantage right now. So if you ain't on that, then you pretty much are gonna limit yourself as far as like the amount of popularity that you have. You know what I mean? But here with Virgil Ortiz Jr., hey, good luck to you, partner. Good luck to you, partner. Because if you gonna be going through this whole thing with arbitration, it's gonna last at least past the whole thing with August. So you might have this whole thing continuing through September. So you might not be able to fight from this point until through that part of September, right? So all you had to do is just wait it out, or just have some type of conflict and say, hey, you know what, y'all aren't able to have a fight for me, for a second fight for me for this span of the 12 months. Hey, that breaches the contract, or that ain't part of the contract. The contract is void now. But nope, they want to jump the gun, do some things out of character, and then try to contend that that Golden Boy breached their part of the agreement by saying, hey, one, y'all didn't offer a couple more opponents for us, or whatever it is. I tried to tell people that was irrelevant. The whole thing, as far as like Golden Boy's agreement with the zone, kind of like going out the window, or not having a long-term agreement with the zone, that wouldn't really matter. They have a provisional agreement with the zone. Hey, didn't we see them on the zone last month? Yeah. Does Golden Boy have a event coming up on March 14th on the zone? Yes, they do. So, at least for me, that ain't even matter. All right. So, good luck to Virgil Ortiz. I'm like, hey, be a good kid, all that type of stuff. But whole thing with Meridian, yeah, they kind of messed him up. And I did also mention there was another thing that was brought up to, or at least in reference to the trainer of Virgil Ortiz Jr., that also dealt with another fighter there. And what was it, Alexis Rocha or something like that, where they kind of, worked something out Oh no, I don't think it was Alexis Rocha. I think it was Raul Curiel, right? So that thing there, real quick. Raul Curiel had the bout on January 16th. That was in what, Palm Springs, whatever it was. That was that Golden Boy card that was on the zone. That was what, a Friday, right? Friday, January 16th. Now, Curiel was supposed to be facing Alexis Rocha in a rematch, but Rocha ended up with some weight. So they had to scramble in order to get salvage that card. Golden Boy had to. So they ended up getting an opponent there for Raul Curiel. Raul Curiel, if I'm not mistaken, is trained by Robert Garcia. And Robert Garcia basically said, like, hey, they hit us up, they worked to try to do what they needed to do in order to work things out, in order to salvage, Curiel having a fight on that date. So you got that trainer saying good things about, what's going on there with Golden Boy Promotions in reference to one of his fighters, then that basically tells you, hey, I feel bad for Virgil Ortiz Jr., but he gonna be stuck. He gonna be stuck. You feel me? All right, so that's what I got on that. Big ups for everyone that's listening live here, whether it's through Rumble or through YouTube right now, and also be either watching the replay or listening to the replay there, on forum. Shout out to my guy Cam J Network there. It says, hit the like button, show him love. Shout out to Cam J Network. We had a very good interview with my guy brother Kenneth Buhari of PBC. So if y'all can go ahead and check that out. That's on his YouTube channel. All right. Now somebody, the thing there, like pugilism was mentioned here earlier, as far as like, streaming, being on social media, having that type of presence there. I mentioned the thing there with Keyshawn Davis. Okay. Keyshawn Davis, as I was mentioning, was a former WBO lightweight champion. He won the WBO title last year. February 14th of last year, theater at Madison Square Garden. I was there when he, stopped Dennis Berinchick. Of course, he was supposed to defend that title in Norfolk against Edwin De Los Santos. Didn't end up working that way. Okay. And we recently saw him in action on January 31st against Jermaine Ortiz. They say think that he doesn't go by the businessman anymore, that he goes by the amazing Keyshawn Davis. But I think it was on Fight Hype or something like that, where I saw him in an interview, and he said that there may be news of him being involved in a fight pretty soon. Now, of course, he had, after the win against Jermaine Ortiz, that he was calling out Devin Miles Haney there at 147 pounds. Of course, with Haney being the WBO welterweight champion. Okay, that's one thing. But there has also been a potential buzz that he could be in the running to face another fighter out there at 147 pounds. Okay. So, and I said it back then after the win that Keyshawn Davis had. I said, man, you talking about going up to 147? I'm like, man, you just got to 140. Now you going up to 147? It's crazy. But he says that it could potentially happen. And one of the fighters that was there as a potential opponent there at 147 is the IBF champion there in Lewis Crocker. Okay. Now, he was saying in that little interview with that conversation, because, of course, he was doing the whole thing with the kick streams. He's still doing that. We had the whole thing with, what was it, Bruce Carrington and Nico Ali Walsh, and, a couple of these, what do you call it, these influencers, all that stuff in social media. But when he was saying that there was news about a potential fight coming soon, and what was it? The person that was asking the question, he mentioned a couple of fighters, right? And the first person he mentioned was Lewis Crocker, right? And when he mentioned Lewis Crocker, Keyshawn Davis was like, he was on his head, like, I was like, oh man. Yeah, he pretty much like was giving out clues or something, As far as like what is it? He said he thinks that Crocker had an opponent already. Hey man, I don't know. You know, I thought they would have something lined up with him and Liam Paro maybe, but who knows? I thought Paro, if I'm not mistaken, hold on, let me see what's up with Paro because he should be in line for something himself, right? Yeah, I would have thought that it would have been like Crocker versus Paro or something like that, but who knows? But yeah, I hadn't really seen much of anything there with Lewis Crocker as far as like him having a potential matchup. But I'll check it because it's like, hey, you would at least try to have Crocker have a one defense or something like that. But yeah, it's something, man. Um, but I'd rather see what would happen with Keyshawn Davis at 140 pounds. Kind of like said that, but hey, if he says that hey he would want to get in with the IBF champion, I guess he would have the potential for the IBF. But it's crazy because as I was showing earlier, Keyshawn Davis is currently rated number one in the WBO rankings at 140 pounds, right? But now he's like saying, hey, he could want to pursue a bout with Lewis Crocker, who's the IBF champion. Yeah, it's crazy, man. Um, uh, yeah, so that's the thing, man. It looks like they're trying to see if it could be a potential bout between Keyshawn Davis and Lewis Crocker for that IBF belt. That would be wild. It says what pugilism out here saying he good for 147. That's why he didn't dehydrate down to 135. Wasn't the best accountable move, but if he was in Santos' shoes, he would also, he'd also continue to fight like he did versus Lemos. Yeah, I mean, y'all know about that situation, right? I mean, he was, overweight by like 4 pounds. Edwin De Los Santos still wanted to fight because he still wanted to compete for, that WBO lightweight title. It was just, the promoter ended up saying no, and that's why Santos left Samson Lukowicz, and now he's with Brian Norman Jr. and Brian Norman's new promotional company. But yeah, Santos would have still went through with the fight, and then you talked about the thing there with the Lemos joint when Keyshawn fought Lemos, and Lemos was overweight at the time. They still did what they had to do in order to salvage that particular fight. But like I said back then, before that fight was happening, they were saying ain't no way they were going they were going to let Gustavo Lemos leave Norfolk and them not having a fight with Keyshawn Davis that night, man. But yeah, I think here, with Keyshawn, it looks like he's I guess getting into that where he's gaining a lot of weight to where it will make him harder and harder to get down to 140 pounds. Now remember his before the bout that he had on January 31st, his last bout was February 14th of last year. So going through about 11 months or so without having a fight, that's something. And then if he says that hey he's good for 147, then maybe he is walking around in a certain weight to where it would be a lot easier for him to be at 147 pounds. But getting a quick title shot there against Liam Paro, I don't know, man. I don't know. That's like something to where, excuse me, that you got the IBF. And remember, as I said at the beginning of the show, the IBF, the IBFing. So unless if you had the party there for a Keyshawn Davis petitioning to have the IBF be there in the rankings, then we'll see because recently the IBF had recently put out their rankings. Got Power there as the top rated contender, Patty Donovan at number 3. And you don't see Keyshawn Davis out there yet. So unless they're making an announcement that says that they'll formally enter Keyshawn Davis in the IBF rankings, the next one that'll be coming out, that would be next month, then that would be something. But after one fight at 140 pounds, him getting in there with Lewis Crocker for the IBF belt, that would be something crazy. That would be something crazy on that. You know what I mean, so with that being said, I would want to see, what would happen there with Keyshawn Davis. Yeah, he does, bring a good amount of interest here. He's kind of like grown in popularity since 2024. When he was initially on that route to fighting for and winning the WBO lightweight title. Now we got to see what's going to be next here for Keyshawn Davis. Of course, he has his brothers that will be involved in a fight card over at Old Dominion University in Norfolk. That's what's scheduled for April 4th. So, we hopefully we get more information on that. I might, reach out to Kelvin Davis and Keon Davis to, kind of like talk about their upcoming fights that they have on that card. There, that's going to be a really nice card that they'll have out there in Norfolk. What I mean? So be on the lookout for that. The other thing that I wanted to, talk about, there was the announcement that was on Friday, right? I'm gonna go on to share this. Hold on. Here's how I'm going to kind of like share it because I was out there for the press conference, right? That was at Madison Square Garden. So most valuable promotions MVP, they announced the launch of MVPW. Okay, there's a platform there for women's boxing. And it's also there in conjunction with the landmark multi-year agreement that they have with ESPN as the home of MVPW events in the United States through 2028. Okay. Um, I thought that was pretty big news. They had the thing as far as like announcements of a couple of events that's coming up for it, right? Including April 17th there. That's going to be at the theater at Madison Square Garden. You're going to have two fights that's going to be on that card that do involve the two fighters that are on there, right? With Alicia Baumgartner going up against Bomi Ray Shin, right? And you're going to also have Shadeja Green versus Lonnie Daniels on that card. But that's going to be the second event on MVPW. The first one that they're going to have is the Caroline Dubois versus Terry Harper fight card that's going to be over in the UK, but it's going to be streaming live on the ESPN app in the US. Okay, but the inaugural MVPW event in the US is that fight card that I mentioned there with Baumgartner going up against Bobby May Shin and Shadeja Green going up against Lonnie Daniels. You also have the next one that is scheduled to be in, what was that? They said that would be in May, right? May 30th. That'll be in El Paso, Texas, with the rematch of Stephanie Hahn versus Holly Holm there. So you had a number of fighters that were represented in that press conference there. You had Amanda Serrano that was there, of course. You had Alicia Baumgartner. You had Shadeja Green, right? You had Stephanie Hahn. You had Holly Holm. You had Ciara Brown, WBC featherweight champion. There you had Tam Thibault there that was at the presser, right? We had man, excuse me there. Um, we also had O'Shea Jones there, of course, world champion in 154, and you had Leanna Cruz that was there. So you had a number of the fighters that are under most valuable promotions that were represented in that, and a number of those fighters will be involved in cards later on down the line that haven't quite been announced yet. But I think that was like a landmark deal that most valuable promotions was able to secure to have it, be on ESPN. Now, we have to see, what they're going to have as far as like potential matchups that are out there. Y'all could go to most valuable promotions. You can see the roster that they have, and you can have the potential of matchups that could be made there on these fight cards or whatever it is. So we have to see what develops from it. Now, one of the key questions, at least to me, on that pressure that happened on Friday was involving their Amanda Serrano, who is a unified champion there in the featherweight division. Okay. And as I mentioned, you had the WBC champion there in Ciara Brown. Okay. So they were saying, hey, I know that Serrano had a recent fight there. What was it like a couple months ago? But she did mention that you could have a potential bout with Tiara Brown there in a unification. But we'll see what happens because hey, Serrano had a real good scrap against Reina Tellez, and Tellez was like a late replacement on that fight card, and Tellez made a good account of herself on that. Now I wonder if it's not going to be Serrano and Tiara Brown next. Maybe we could have Tiara Brown versus Tellez. That could be on the docket. So hopefully we'll find out soon enough. Want to see Tara Brown back in the ring. You want to see what would happen here with Amanda Serrano, but a lot of those fighters that you're seeing out there, for that announcement, they'll soon have some things going on. As I mentioned, you got that rematch that's going to be scheduled between Stephanie Hahn and Holly Holm. You got O'Shea Jones that was on there, of course, being a world champion. That that she could potentially fight Chantel Cameron in a unification bout. So we got a number of things there that's happening. So we're gonna have news and updates on that. You had Liana Cruz that was on there, mandatory for the WBA title. So we'll see what happens with her as well. But you got a lot of news that's going to be coming in reference to that. So we'll have to see how that goes on that front. But that's mainly what I had on there. I do have like some comments from Alicia Baumgartner, Shadeja Green, and Stephanie Hahn. That's on the YouTube channel. There, that was after that press conference, so you can check that out on the YouTube channel here at the front. But as of right now, that's mainly what I wanted to cover here on this edition of the Boxing Source podcast. Again, we do have that Zuffa Boxing event that's happening right now. At least while I'm doing this live recording. You know what I mean? So we'll see what happens here, particularly with that main event that's coming up there with Jai Opetaia and Brandon Glanton. We gotta see how this is going to shape itself here. Of course, with it being for the Zuffa Boxing title, but not for the IBF cruiserweight title. So that's gonna make things interesting. Of course, you have like Ricardo Salas versus Jesus Saracho on the card. Vlad Panin versus Shinar Bunch. You already had Joshua Juarez get a unanimous decision win over Jarde Anderson on there, and we had two majority draws that happened already. Jacob Ramos and Ethan Perez had a draw, and Brady Ochoa and Adrian Serrano had a draw. Okay. You also had the thing there with Emiliano Alvarado getting a unanimous decision win over Eric Rosado. And I know Eric Rosado, like, hold up. Wait a minute. Hold up. Time out, y'all. I'm just reading this because, hey, I'm going to be real with y'all. There's some things that I don't quite, like catch up with, like boxers, like a whole lot of stuff going on and everything like that. The thing there with the Zuffa Boxing card, there was like a few fights that were on there that I was looking at, but I didn't necessarily look at the entire card. Okay, seeing this result here, this last result that I just stated, okay, and seeing that last name that I mentioned, Eric Rosado, and I'm like, wait a minute, that name sounds familiar. Eric Rosado. Hold up. Oh, he was on that Davis Boxing Promotions card that was in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago and had that unanimous decision win over Chris Glenn. Wait a minute. So you mean to tell me that they were able to put him on another card here within 2 weeks? Crazy work, bro. Crazy work. And he was in there against undefeated Emiliano Alvarado and lost by unanimous decision. He ended up getting knocked down in the second round. Okay. And remember, Eric Rosado was able to knock down Chris Glenn in the sixth round of their bout, which was scheduled for 8 rounds. And, at that bout on, Davis Boxing Promotions, that was a close bout. That was really, really close going into that sixth round. And I said then that the knockdown that was scored by Eric Rosado was the difference in that fight. And now I see that he is able to get right back in the ring a couple of weeks later in Las Vegas against Emiliano Alvarado. That is wild, bro. That's wild. So yeah, that's what we currently have going on with Zuffa Boxing and live updates. What I'm saying on the Boxing Source podcast here. But we got like I said, 4 fights that are on slate. I think they got it scheduled to start at 9 p.m. Eastern time there with those 4 fights. So y'all be able to enjoy those fights here on Paramount Plus and everything like that. But that's what I got here for this edition of the Boxing Source podcast. Once again, thanks for everyone that's been able to listen here live. And for those that'll be watching the replay or, being able to listen to the replay that will be on Spotify, iHeart, Amazon podcasts, all that type of stuff there. So y'all be able to listen to it on demand. But thanks everyone again for listening in. Enjoy the fights tonight. We'll catch up again, with the midweek report scheduled for Wednesday evening. And until next time, man, I will catch y'all later. Peace out.